Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. A choice no mother should face. What would you do if your faith demanded that you choose between your life and the life of your unborn child? For Evelyn, a devoted woman in a deeply religious and secluded community, this was not just a question. It was a cruel reality. A test of love and sacrifice that would shake the very foundations of everything she had ever believed in. Her decision, born from an unyielding faith and a mother's love, would leave an entire medical team weeping, their hearts forever changed by the magnitude of her courage. The early years, a life of devotion. Evelyn had always been known as a quiet, obedient daughter, someone who never questioned the rules of their faith. Raised in a deeply conservative religious community, her life had been shaped by tradition. Her people believed that everything, love, marriage, children, was dictated by divine will. To question fate was to challenge God himself. So when Daniel, a respected and pious man from her community, expressed interest in her, she considered it a blessing. Their courtship was short, as was the way of their people. There were no stolen kisses or whispered confessions of love. Their conversations were brief and always under the watchful eye of elders. When Daniel finally asked for her hand in marriage, Evelyn's father agreed immediately, and within a few months, she became his wife. At first, Evelyn believed she was stepping into a life of happiness. Daniel was respected, hardworking, and deeply religious. Their home was modest but filled with warmth, at least in the beginning. They prayed together, broke bread together, and honored their faith together. To an outsider, their marriage would have seemed peaceful. But beneath the surface, Evelyn was struggling, the silent pain of a childless woman. In their community, a woman's worth was tied to her ability to bear children. A good wife was expected to become a mother, to raise children who would follow in the ways of their faith. But month after month, Evelyn's womb remained empty. The whispers began softly at first. Curious neighbors, well-meaning women from church, asking in hushed voices, "Is there something wrong?" But as the years passed, the whispers turned into outright judgment. "A wife who cannot bear children is cursed," one woman said, shaking her head as Evelyn walked past. "Maybe God is punishing her for something," another muttered. Evelyn tried to silence the fear that grew inside her, but the weight of expectation crushed her with each passing year. Daniel, who had once been gentle and patient, changed too. The man who had held her hand during prayers now barely looked at her during meals. He spoke to her in clipped, cold words. He avoided their home more and more, staying late at work or seeking the company of his friends. And worst of all, he refused to consider seeking medical help. "Children are a gift from God. If we have none, it is His will," he would say, ending the conversation before it could even begin. Evelyn prayed. She prayed every night, every morning, every moment in between. She prayed for a child, for Daniel's love, for a sign that she was not failing as a wife. But her prayers remained unanswered. Until, one day, everything changed. A miracle that came with a warning. 7 years into their marriage, Evelyn began to feel different. She woke up nauseous every morning. Her body ached in unfamiliar ways, and her energy drained faster than usual. A quiet hope loomed inside her. Could it be? Could she finally be carrying the child she had prayed for? Daniel was skeptical at first, but as the weeks passed, it became undeniable. Evelyn was pregnant. Tears of joy streamed down her face when the community midwife confirmed it. The women who once whispered behind her back now surrounded her with excitement, offering well wishes and advice. Daniel, though still distant, began to soften. He held her hand during church again. He spoke to her with kindness, even smiling at her occasionally. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt truly happy. She believed this child would bring them together, would heal the wounds that had been growing between them. But that joy was short-lived. As her pregnancy progressed, Evelyn noticed something strange. Her belly grew at an alarming rate, far larger than what seemed normal for her stage. The exhaustion became unbearable. She felt dizzy often, and even simple tasks left her breathless. Deep inside, an unsettling fear took root. Something was wrong. But speaking those fears aloud, that was forbidden. When she tried to voice her concerns, the response was always the same: have faith. Her mother dismissed her worries, insisting it was God's plan. The midwife offered only gentle reassurances, telling her that every pregnancy is different. And Daniel, his reaction was the worst. "You will not question God's will," he said, his voice sharp as steel. "If you are sick, then you will endure it. Our child will be born as God intended, without the interference of doctors or machines." That night, as Evelyn lay awake, the truth settled in her heart. She was on her own, a mother's choice. As the weeks passed, Evelyn's condition worsened. The pain became unbearable, and the dizziness grew so severe that she struggled to stand. One evening, as she prepared dinner, the world around her tilted. She reached out for the counter, but her vision blurred. And then, darkness. She awoke to Daniel shaking her, his face filled with something she couldn't quite place. Was it worry? Frustration? Disappointment? "Get up," he ordered. "The food is burning." No concern for her well-being. No mention of the fact that she had collapsed. Just another reminder that in his eyes, her only duty was to endure. That night, as Evelyn lay in bed, she made a decision. She could no longer rely on Daniel to protect her. If she wanted to survive, if she wanted her baby to live, she had to do something drastic. She would leave. But running away was not just difficult, it was dangerous. In their community, a woman who abandoned her husband would be shunned. She would be cast out, labeled as fallen. There would be no home to return to, no family to lean on. Still, as she placed a trembling hand over her swollen belly, she knew she had no choice. She waited until the early morning, when the world was still asleep. She packed a small bag, stuffed a handful of money she had secretly saved into her pocket, and slipped out the door. She did not look back. With every step, she whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for the life growing inside her. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. She would fight for her child, even if it meant risking everything. Running toward hope, chased by fear. The cold morning air bit at Evelyn's skin as she stepped out onto the dirt road, her breath forming ghostly clouds in the dim light of dawn. The world was eerily silent, as if it too was holding its breath, waiting to see if she would succeed, or if she would be caught and dragged back before she even made it past the gates of her community. She tightened the shawl around her shoulders, one hand instinctively resting on the swell of her belly. The child within her shifted, a small flutter beneath her ribs, as if sensing the storm of fear and determination raging inside her. She wanted to whisper soothing words to her baby, to promise safety, but she knew that promises meant nothing unless she could find a way to keep them. With each careful step down the winding path leading out of her village, she felt the weight of every rule she had ever been bound by. A woman does not leave her husband. A wife obeys. A mother does not question God's will. Yet here she was, breaking every commandment that had been drilled into her since childhood. Her escape was not just a defiance of her marriage or of Daniel's authority. It was a rejection of the very life she had been told was the only way to live. And if she was caught, she knew exactly what would happen. Daniel would never allow this betrayal to go unanswered. She would be dragged back in shame, held accountable before the elders. There would be no pity, no understanding. She would be made to confess her sins, to repent, to swear loyalty to the very man who had turned his back on her when she needed him most. And if she refused, she would be cast out, alone, forgotten. But she was already alone, forgotten. And she would rather face the unknown than die in a home that no longer saw her as a person, only as a woman that had finally served its purpose. Evelyn pressed forward. The walk to the nearest town was long, and the pain in her back throbbed with every step. She ignored it. She ignored the way the weight of her body made her legs ache, ignored the gnawing hunger that had become her constant companion these past few months. She had no plan, no idea where she would go once she arrived. All she knew was that she needed to reach a hospital. A part of her was still afraid of what the doctors would say, afraid they would confirm what her body already knew, that something was terribly wrong. But that fear paled in comparison to the one that loomed behind her, growing stronger with every second. She needed to keep moving. The minutes bled into hours. Her feet dragged through the dust of the road, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. The early light of dawn gave way to the heat of morning, and sweat pooled at the base of her neck, dampening the fabric of her dress. Then, in the distance, she saw it, the silhouette of the town. It was small but alive, unlike the silent, rigid world she had left behind. Cars hummed along the streets. People bustled between stores. Voices mingled in casual conversation. The sight was both overwhelming and a relief. This was freedom. She had made it. But before she could take another step, a voice pierced the air behind her. Evelyn. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned, and for one terrifying second, she thought she had been found. But it was not Daniel. It was her mother. A mother's plea. Nicole's face was flushed, her chest heaving as if she had been running. Her usual neat appearance was replaced with disheveled worry. Evelyn, stop, she called again, desperation thick in her voice. Evelyn froze. She had expected Daniel to be the one who chased her. The elders, the men from the church, but not her mother. Nicole reached her, her hands trembling as she clutched Evelyn's arms. "What are you doing?" she whispered, eyes wide with panic. "You can't leave. If Daniel finds out you've run, he'll..." Evelyn yanked her arms away. "He'll what?" Her voice was sharp, raw. "Lock me inside our house. Let me die carrying his child. Tell me, mother, what exactly is the punishment for a woman trying to save her own life?" Nicole flinched at the words. For the first time, Evelyn saw something in her mother's eyes that she had never seen before. Doubt. Nicole had spent her life preaching obedience, upholding the rules of their faith with unwavering conviction. But now, standing in front of her pregnant daughter, face to face with the consequences of the life she had always defended, she wavered. Evelyn took a deep breath, forcing her voice to soften. "Mother, I need help. Please." Nicole swallowed, her eyes flickering with an internal battle Evelyn could not fully understand. "If you leave, there will be no way back," she whispered. "There was never a way back," Evelyn replied. "Only a way forward." Silence stretched between them. Then, to Evelyn's shock, Nicole reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wad of cash. "Take it," her mother whispered, shoving the money into her hands. "Go, find a hospital. Find someone who can help you. I can't protect you anymore." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision. She had expected her mother to fight her, to drag her back. She had not expected this. Without another word, Evelyn took the money, turned, and ran. The hospital that changed everything. By the time Evelyn stumbled through the doors of the nearest hospital, her legs had nearly given out. A nurse at the front desk looked up in alarm. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I need help," Evelyn gasped, her voice weak. "I'm pregnant. Something is wrong." Within moments, a team of medical staff was at her side, guiding her into a wheelchair and rushing her down a hallway. She had never been in a hospital before. The bright lights, the sterile smell, the hurried footsteps of doctors. It was all foreign. Yet, for the first time in months, she felt safe. A doctor knelt beside her, pressing a reassuring hand to her shoulder. "You're going to be okay," he said. "We'll take care of you." And for the first time, she believed it. They wheeled her into an exam room, attaching monitors to her belly, listening to the heartbeat of the baby within her. It was strong. Too strong. The doctor's expression darkened as he studied the screen, his brow furrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. Evelyn's stomach twisted. "What's wrong?" she whispered. The doctor hesitated. Then, with a voice laced with concern, he looked at her and said the words that would change everything. "Your baby is not alone. There's another." Evelyn's world spun. A second baby. Twins. But the doctor wasn't finished. His voice dropped, his expression grim. "There's something else, something we need to talk about." Evelyn's heart pounded. Somewhere deep inside, she knew. This was only the beginning. A mother's silent battle. The beeping of machines was the first thing Evelyn registered when she opened her eyes. She was lying on a hospital bed, a crisp white sheet covering her legs. The air smelled sterile, antiseptic, and clean, yet suffocating in its unfamiliarity. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, their cold glow making the white walls seem even more distant from anything that resembled the life she had known. For a brief moment, she thought she was dreaming. That she would wake up and find herself back in the house she had shared with Daniel, with the weight of silence pressing down on her, with the knowledge that she had no voice, no choices, no way out. But then a voice cut through the haze. "Evelyn." She turned her head slowly, feeling the pull of exhaustion deep in her bones. A nurse stood beside her, her warm brown eyes filled with something Evelyn couldn't quite place. Pity, maybe. Concern. "You're awake," the nurse said softly, adjusting the IV attached to Evelyn's arm. "You scared us for a moment." Evelyn swallowed, her throat dry. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through her abdomen, stopping her in her tracks. The nurse placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Take it slow," she advised. "You've been through a lot." Evelyn blinked, trying to gather her thoughts. Then, like a tidal wave crashing over her, the memories came flooding back. The escape, her mother's unexpected kindness, the hospital, the doctor's grim expression as he studied the ultrasound screen. Her hand flew to her belly. "The baby," she rasped. "No, the babies." The nurse's expression softened. "They're both alive," she said. "For now." The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around Evelyn's throat. "For now." She felt the room spin, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had risked everything to get here. She had run from the only life she had ever known. She had defied Daniel, her faith, her entire upbringing, all for them. And now she might lose them anyway. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, no, no." The nurse squeezed her hand. "Listen to me, Evelyn. We're going to do everything we can for you and the babies. But we need to be honest about what's happening." Evelyn nodded numbly. A moment later, the door creaked open, and the doctor from before walked in. His name tag read Dr. Keller. He pulled up a chair beside her bed, his face unreadable. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tell me what's wrong," Evelyn whispered, cutting straight to the point. "Don't soften it. I need the truth." The doctor studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Evelyn, your pregnancy is extremely high risk," he said carefully. "Your babies are growing at an accelerated rate, far beyond what is normal." Evelyn's fingers gripped the sheets beneath her. "Why?" Dr. Keller exhaled slowly. "We're not sure. It could be a rare genetic condition, or something entirely unpredictable. But what we do know is that if this continues, your body won't be able to sustain the pregnancy much longer." His words landed like a hammer to her chest. Evelyn had spent years begging for this pregnancy. Years of silent prayers, of watching other women in her community cradle their newborns while she endured the quiet, suffocating weight of barrenness. And now, when she had finally been given this gift, she was being told she might not survive it. "What does that mean?" she forced out. The doctor hesitated, as if choosing his next words carefully. "It means we have a difficult decision to make," he said. If we don't intervene soon, there's a high chance neither you nor your babies will make it." Evelyn felt her breath catch. He continued, his voice steady but heavy. "One option is to deliver the babies early, but at their current stage, that carries serious risks. Their lungs may not be fully developed. Their survival isn't guaranteed." Evelyn's entire body tensed. "And the other option?" Dr. Keller's expression darkened. "If we wait, you may not survive childbirth." The air in the room turned unbearably thick, suffocating. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Evelyn had always believed in faith, in God's plan. She had been taught that miracles required trust, that if she simply believed hard enough, she would be rewarded. But this was no miracle. This was a sentence. She turned her gaze toward the ceiling, her mind racing. If she agreed to an early delivery, there was no guarantee her children would live. If she waited, she would almost certainly die. Her hands trembled against the sheets. For the first time in her life, faith was not enough. She had to make a choice, and no matter what she chose, someone would suffer. A mother's resolve. That night, as Evelyn lay awake in her hospital bed, she felt her babies move inside her, tiny kicks pressing against her ribs. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling their strength, their life. "I won't leave you," she whispered. "I promise." But promises meant nothing if she couldn't keep them. She had never been given choices before. Not in her marriage, not in her community. Every decision had always been made for her. But this one was hers alone. And she would not let fear decide it for her. By morning, when the doctor returned, Evelyn's voice did not waver. "I will carry them as long as I can," she said. "But if it comes down to my life or theirs, you save them. No matter what." Dr. Keller searched her face for any hint of doubt, but there was none. This was her decision, and she would fight for them, no matter the cost. The storm before the dawn. Days passed, and Evelyn's condition worsened. She grew weaker. Her body ached in ways she couldn't describe. Walking became unbearable. Her vision blurred from exhaustion, from the weight of sustaining life when her body was failing. The doctors monitored her closely, but they all knew it was only a matter of time. Then, late one evening, the storm finally arrived. A sharp pain tore through Evelyn's abdomen, so intense that she gasped aloud, her hands clutching her stomach. The machines beside her erupted into frantic beeping, and within seconds, nurses flooded the room. She barely registered the chaos, the voices shouting orders, the rush of movement, because the only thing she could focus on was the truth settling deep into her bones. It was happening. She was going into labor, and she might not make it out alive. As the medical team wheeled her into surgery, Evelyn's mind was calm. There was no fear now, no regrets, because she had already made her choice. She had chosen them. The cry that changed everything. The world was a blur. Bright lights, voices shouting, the rapid beeping of machines. Evelyn was slipping in and out of consciousness as she was rushed down the hallway, the sterile ceiling tiles flashing above her like fragments of a life, unraveling too fast to hold on to. A firm hand grasped hers. "Evelyn, stay with me." Dr. Keller's voice cut through the haze. She blinked, struggling to focus. My babies. "They're coming," he assured her. "But we have to act now." Her body trembled with unbearable pain, but she forced herself to nod. She had made her choice. She would not let fear take her now. The doors to the operating room swung open, and suddenly, she was surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses, all moving with quiet urgency. Her body felt like it was being torn apart, the pain sharper than anything she had ever known. But she didn't cry out. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was a mother, and she would not waste her final moments on fear. A birth against time. The voices blurred together as the medical team worked. Evelyn felt hands on her belly, the cold sensation of antiseptic being applied. The stark white lights above her felt too bright, too cruel for such a fragile moment. Someone pressed an oxygen mask over her face. "Evelyn, I need you to breathe," a nurse urged. Breathe. It should have been simple, but each inhale felt heavier than the last, like her lungs were filling with something thicker than air. Then, a sudden pressure, a pull, and then, a cry. A loud, piercing, miraculous cry. Evelyn gasped, her entire body trembling. Her baby was here. A second later, another cry followed. 2 cries, 2 lives. Her children had made it. Tears slipped down the sides of her face, her vision blurred, the world tilting. The sound of their cries was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. And then, everything went dark. Between life and death, the darkness was not empty. It was warm, soft. It felt like floating between 2 worlds, as if she were suspended in the space between life and death. She was weightless, for the first time in months. No pain, no exhaustion, no fear, only peace. But then, a sound cut through the stillness. A whisper, a voice she had known her entire life. Evelyn. She turned, though she had no body, no form, toward the voice. It was her mother's voice. Not Nicole, the woman she had left behind, but the mother she had lost as a child. The one who had died long before Evelyn had ever truly known her. "You have to go back," her mother's voice whispered. Evelyn didn't understand. She felt safe here. But then, another sound. 2 cries, faint but desperate. Her children, her babies. They were waiting for her, needing her, fighting for her. The pull was sudden, sharp, like a thread being snapped back into place. And just like that, she was falling. Back into the pain. Back into the weight of a body that felt too weak, too broken. Back into life. A second chance. Evelyn awoke to the rhythmic beeping of machines. Her body felt heavy, sore, exhausted beyond reason. But she was alive. Barely. Her throat was dry. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a rasp. A nurse noticed and hurried over. Evelyn. She blinked slowly, her body sluggish. Then she remembered. "The babies," she whispered, barely able to form the words. "Where are they?" The nurse smiled softly. "They're in the NICU, but they're fighters, just like their mother." Relief flooded her so suddenly, she thought she might sob. She had made it, and so had they. The nurse hesitated before continuing. "Evelyn, you lost a lot of blood. We almost—" She stopped, shaking her head. "You were very lucky." Lucky. Evelyn almost laughed. Lucky wasn't the right word. She had survived because she had chosen to fight. Even when everything told her to let go. Even when her body had begged her to give in. She had held on. For them. For the 2 tiny lives who had already fought their first battle before they had even taken their first steps. She closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. But this time, it wasn't fear that lulled her to sleep. It was peace. A love stronger than fear. The next time she woke, it was to the softest touch against her skin. A small, delicate weight was placed in her arms, bundled in warm fabric. She looked down, and for the first time, she saw her child. Tiny fingers, soft, round cheeks, a face so small and yet so full of life. She couldn't breathe. Not because she was weak, but because she was so overwhelmed with love that it consumed her completely. A second bundle was placed beside her. Both of them. Her miracle babies. A sob escaped her. She pressed her lips to their tiny foreheads, inhaling the sweet scent of life. The war wasn't over. She still had a long road ahead. Healing, rebuilding, figuring out how to exist in a world that no longer controlled her. But for the first time in her life, she was free. And she had won. Not through submission, not through silent suffering, but through a mother's unbreakable love. And that love, it was stronger than faith, stronger than fear, stronger than anything. A new dawn, a new life. Evelyn sat by the window, sunlight spilling over her skin like a quiet blessing. The world outside was awake, birds chirping, cars passing, life moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, she was moving forward too. She glanced down at the tiny bundle in her arms. Her daughter. The second bundle lay in a bassinet beside her, sleeping soundly. Her son. They were both here, alive, safe. She had fought for them, and she had won. But victory did not come without a cost. Her body was still weak. The doctors had warned her that she had been moments away from dying on that operating table, that she had lost so much blood. It was a miracle she had even survived. A miracle. She had spent her whole life waiting for one, praying for one, only to realize that she had become her own. She had saved herself. She had saved them. And that was enough. A mother's love never fades. Days passed in a blur of whispered lullabies, sleepless nights, and stolen moments where Evelyn simply watched them. Her son, with his tiny fingers always curled into fists, as if ready to fight the world. Her daughter, with eyes too wise for a newborn, gazing up at Evelyn like she already knew everything her mother had endured. They were so small, so fragile, yet stronger than anyone had given them credit for. And every time Evelyn held them, she whispered the same promise. You will never feel unloved. You will never be unwanted. I will never let anyone make you feel less than you are. It was a promise her own mother had never been able to make. But Evelyn would break the cycle. She had to. The woman who walked away. Her past was still out there, waiting for her like an open wound. Daniel. The community. The people who would never understand why she had run. The ones who would call her a sinner, a betrayer. But she was not afraid anymore. She had lived under the weight of their rules, had suffocated beneath the expectations that told her a woman's life belonged to her husband, to her faith, but never to herself. Not anymore. She had walked away from that life, and she was never going back. One day, when her children were older, they might ask about him. Where is our father? Why didn't he come for us? And she would tell them the truth. He was not meant to be our family. Because family is not just blood. Family is love. Family is sacrifice. Family is the ones who choose you over and over, no matter what. And Daniel had never chosen them. But she had. An unexpected visitor. It had been weeks since Evelyn had left the hospital, weeks of learning how to exist in a world that was hers for the first time. She had found a small apartment, not much, but hers, a place where she could breathe without waiting for the next cruel word, the next cold glance. Then, one evening, as she rocked her daughter to sleep, there was a knock at the door. Her breath caught. No one ever knocked. She hesitated, then slowly stood, her son still asleep in the bassinet, as she cradled her daughter in one arm and walked to the door. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and pulled it open. And there, standing in the dim light of the hallway, was the last person she expected to see. Her mother. Nicole's eyes were red-rimmed, her face gaunt, as if she had aged 10 years in the few weeks they had been apart. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, Nicole whispered, I was wrong. Evelyn's throat tightened. Nicole took a shaky breath. I should have listened. I should have protected you. She swallowed hard. But I let fear control me. I let our faith, our rules, blind me. Evelyn's heart ached at the regret in her mother's voice. Nicole looked down at the tiny bundle in Evelyn's arms. Her granddaughter. Tears welled in her eyes. She's beautiful. Evelyn hesitated. Then, without a word, she stepped aside. And for the first time in her life, her mother walked toward her instead of away. The strength to begin again. The road ahead was uncertain. There would be struggles, sleepless nights, fears that crept in when the world grew quiet. But Evelyn was no longer the woman who had begged for love that was never freely given. She was more. She was a survivor, a mother, a woman who had saved herself when no one else would. And as she held her children, their warmth pressed against her, their small breaths steady and strong, she knew she would give them everything. Not wealth, not perfection, but love. Unwavering, unstoppable. The kind of love that could move mountains. The kind of love that had already saved them all. Epilogue. The cry that changed everything. Years passed. Evelyn built a life. Her life. Her children thrived, growing into the kind of people who knew their worth, who walked with confidence, not fear. And one day, long after the pain of the past had settled into something quieter, something distant, her daughter, now a little girl, climbed into her lap and whispered, "Mama, do you believe in miracles?" Evelyn smiled. Because once she had prayed for a miracle, begged for one, and it had taken years to understand that the miracle was never something given to her. The miracle was her. The miracle was choosing to live. The miracle was fighting for love. She pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead and whispered, "Yes, my love. I do." The legacy of love. The years stretched on, like golden threads woven into a tapestry Evelyn never imagined she'd be allowed to weave. The ghosts of her past never fully faded. How could they? Some wounds didn't disappear. They simply became part of the story, scars that whispered of battles fought and won. But they no longer defined her. She had walked away from a life where her voice was silenced, where her body was treated as a vessel for expectation rather than a home for her own soul. She had run toward the unknown with nothing but a desperate hope clutched in her heart. And now she had built a world where she belonged. Her children grew, bright and fearless, carrying no trace of the fear that had once bound her. They did not shrink themselves to fit someone else's mold. Her son, headstrong and kind, held the same quiet strength she had found in herself the day she walked away. Her daughter, with eyes too wise for her years, carried her mother's fire, a spirit that would never be caged. And Evelyn, she was free. Not just from Daniel, not just from the town that had whispered behind her back, but from the version of herself that had once believed she wasn't worthy of saving. One evening, as she sat on the porch of her small but happy home, her daughter curled against her, Evelyn felt the wind shift, carrying the scent of wildflowers and something unnameable, something infinite. Her daughter stirred, looking up at her with those knowing eyes. "Mama." "Yes, love? Do you ever miss the place we came from?" Evelyn thought about it for a long moment. Did she miss the world that had told her who to be? The walls that had once pressed in on her, squeezing the breath from her lungs? No, but she did miss the girl she used to be. The girl who had once believed that her only purpose was to endure. The girl who had prayed for freedom without realizing she already had the strength to take it. And she missed the woman she had become in the act of leaving. Because it was in that moment, not when she gave birth, not when she fled, not even when she survived the impossible, that she was reborn. She looked at her daughter and smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No," she said softly. "I don't miss it." Her daughter nodded, satisfied, and nestled closer. As the last light of the evening melted into the horizon, Evelyn tilted her head back and closed her eyes, inhaling the scent of a life that was truly hers. And for the first time in forever, she didn't need to whisper a prayer for a miracle, because she had become one. And that was enough. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.